All. Thanks all for coming along to this meeting and also for setting it up to the hosts. So just to start with, I'm Dan Griffiths. I'm an environmental planning specialist for the EA, and part of my role is as the River Basin Management Plan lead for Devon and Cornwall. What I'm going to look to do this afternoon is just talk sort of very briefly about a little bit of background on the River Basin Management Plan. Look at the structure of the updated draft River Basin Management Plan and also how to access the various bits of information online. I'm going to have a look at the baseline data that's included in the updated plan and progress from the previous cycle, and sort of pick out key data sets, which are the objectives and the measures that are included in the plan. And then lastly, just look at the consultation questions themselves and try and give a bit of steer on what those questions are, the answers that would be most valuable to them. So just looking at the background to the River Basin Management Plan, the slide here sort of covers all the aspects of it. So it's a very sort of wide-reaching strategic environmental document. And our requirement, why we're updating it at the moment, is we've got a statutory requirement to review and update the River Basin Management Plan every 6 years. And these obligations were originally from the EU Water Framework Directive, subsequently transposed into UK law under the Water Environmental Regulations 2019. I probably will just use the term WFD just for ease in sort of familiarity through this presentation. So River Basin Management Planning is really at the heart of everything we're doing water quality and water resources wise. And it gives us a sort of baseline evidence that underpins a lot of the decision making that we do as well. So in terms of sort of permitting, and also where we're sort of prioritising environmental action, an awful lot of that originates from the evidence that the document includes. The plan includes a number of aspects. We've got legally binding objectives for improvement, environmental standards for water bodies that they're assessed against, a number of actions to deliver improvements, and the sort of overall aim of this updated document is to deliver against the 25-year environmental plan target of clean and plentiful water. The delivery mechanisms that are linked in, there's sort of multiple, but some of the most significant are the WINEP, so it's Water Industry National Environment Programme, the Environment Agency Environment Programme, and also the sort of Catchment partnership way of working. It's all closely linked in with the River Basin Management Plan. And I think really it's something a lot of us are doing as our collective day job all the time, really, is delivering against this plan. So just two key messages that I've picked out for the update. So what the plan's intending to do is summarise and drive millions of pounds of investment during the next cycle up until 2027, and also summarise measures for achieving the objective of 75% of England's waters at good ecological status by 2027. And I think this consultation is really looking at means that we can better contribute to those targets. So it's looking at ways we can improve the final product. Just to sort of put the current state of play into context, we've got some significant challenges with delivery. The first of which is the outcome gap, which is shown by the graph here. So the sort of red line in the middle projects where we're heading with stable pressures. The blue line is sort of the reality of the matter, where we've got the issues of climate change and population growth adding to what we're currently seeing. And the green line is ultimately aspiration, which is to get to that sort of 25-year environment plan headline figure. We're also currently at a pretty challenging baseline. So we've only got 16% of water bodies nationally that achieve good ecological status. And we've seen sort of significant habitat losses that we need to reverse. I think the overall message really is it's all about having a sort of rethink to addressing environmental challenges, which is something that we look to address through the previous challenges and choices consultation. Further, more challenging is around the economics associated with the River Basin Management Plan. So this slide is an output from the forthcoming National Economic Assessment, which is due to be released, I think, early next year. And what it shows is the total investment that's required to reach that target through the 25-year environment plan goal, and where we currently are in terms of investment by sector. So obviously there is a variable performance across those 4 key sectors, but we're falling short across the board of what's required to achieve that target. In terms of progress so far with the draft River Basin Management Plan, so it's something that's been going on for quite some time, certainly internally in the EA, and we're at the third and final of the 3 consultations that are being done on the plan. So the first one was the Working Together consultation back in 2018. So this looked at the partners that need to be involved in producing the draft of the Basin Management Plan, and also how we can sort of better work collaboratively for the environment. The next consultation was Challenges and Choices, which is something we put a lot of effort into, certainly in this area. And that looked at identifying key environmental challenges and how to overcome those problems. And that ran for a year in the end, from October 2019 to September 2020. That was hit obviously by the outbreak of COVID. But it was one of the sort of biggest environmental consultations we've done, with 607 responses nationally. The current state of play is we're looking at the draft River Basin Management Plan with a view to releasing the final document towards the end of 2022. Looking at the structure of the draft River Basin Management Plan, it is quite complicated, to be frank, and this slide, I think, is horribly complicated. So in previous cycles, we've had a summary document which is produced at a river basin district level. So we sit within the Southwest River Basin District, which covers all of Devon and Cornwall. I think the vast majority of Dorset and Somerset, and it stretches as far east as around about the Hampshire Avon. So it's a sort of significant area. And previously, that is the scale at which we had sort of an individual plan with supporting maps and data. There's been quite a change to the structure of the River Basin Management Plan this time round, and we've got a sort of national once approach, and also a lot more individual products. So we've got a singular set of documents that cover the bulk of the text part of the document, which are handled entirely online on the .gov website. And then the more local elements are the sort of data and the measures, which are handled through the data systems. So the slide here covers all the aspects of it and where you can access them. It also gives a little brief description of what each part of the plan does. What I've done in this presentation as well, I've just sort of put a list of all the national once products and where you can access them, just with direct links, just to try and make it a little bit easier to navigate around the plan. And on here, I've highlighted in red the documents which I think are probably most valuable to review if you're looking to respond to the consultation. So like there's a whole list of documents there, but the ones I haven't highlighted are largely sort of statements of fact. So they're describing, like the mechanism summary is describing all the environmental legislation that, you know, we've got backing improvement, which is a really useful resource document, but in truth, it's probably not something that's likely to change off the back of the consultation. So obviously, if you want that background information, it's useful to read. If you're viewing the plan more so for the consultation purposes, I perhaps suggest focusing on the other documents. Of those that are highlighted there, the guide covers how to respond to the River Basin Management Plan consultation, covers the structure of the plan, how to use documents and data, and also it sort of gives a list of what is required in a statutory sense by a River Basin Management Plan, and where all those parts are in this updated version. The summary document covers any updates to the objectives. It covers compliance in terms of water body classification, reasons for not achieving compliance. It also covers the programmes and measures. The challenge narratives, they were produced as part of the Challenges and Choices consultations. So they're the sort of major environmental issues and also sort of means to overcome them. And they have been updated to some extent since that consultation. And then the local case studies at the bottom. It's a less formal part of the document, but it's trying to gives sort of a bit more of a real life feel to the River Basin Management Plan. And in there's a couple of case studies from each area of the EA, and we've covered a case study from the previous cycle that's been delivered, and also a project that's proposed for the next cycle of the River Basin Management Plan. I'm just going to stop very quickly there just to check that's sort of reasonably making sense to everyone. I'm going to move on to the sort of data systems next, but does that all sound okay? Just quickly to check in. Just give me a nod or something. Yeah, perfect, thank you. So just looking at the data systems that support the plan, so all of the data is held online now, and the majority of it is in Catchment Data Explorer, which I suspect quite a lot of you are familiar with and use. This has been updated recently. There's a new version of it, and in there you've got the ability to view sort of water framework directed data at various scales. So you can go from a England level right down to an individual water body. And on there, we've got objectives data, we've got challenges, or what I know as reasons, and we've also got the classification data that forms the baseline for the draft River Basin Management Plan. The one thing I will flag at the very top of this slide, just under the title, I've just took a screen grab from it. When you go onto the Data Explorer, by default, it opens with the latest data, which is actually very, very slightly different to what is being used as the baseline for the River Basin Management Plan, because a cut was taken a little while ago. And there's just a link there that's got the option to switch it over. So if you're looking specifically for plan purposes, it's worth doing that. Otherwise, there's very little change. It's just picking up where there's any amendments to reasons for not achieving good status or updates like that. Next of the data systems, this is a new product. So it's an ArcGIS Online product, which really just gives a spatial view of what is in the Catchment Data Explorer. So there's quite a few set out like a story map type of structure. There's a number of tabs in there. We can look at various bits of data. It's quite interactive as well. You can turn your layers on and off as you please and look at varying scales. The one thing I would say about it, it's very much a visualization tool. There's not actually much information in it in terms of attributes. So if you go into there and click on one of the water bodies, and you can probably see in one of the pop-ups there, it points you back to Catchment Data Explorer to get the detail. But in terms of like an overview, it's quite a nice tool just to look at a high level at some of the information that forms the baseline for the River Basin Management Plan. And there is, I've included a lot of links in this slide. So there's a direct link at the bottom there. So I'm going to move on now to looking at the data that is included in the plan. And first of all, I'm going to look at, well, change from the previous baseline. So for cycle 2 of the River Basin Management Plan, the baseline was in 2015. We're now using the 2019 data as the updated baseline. And first up, I've put ecological status for the surface water bodies and Tamar catchment on this slide and looking at their classification. And in reality, we've not seen a huge amount of change between those two classification years. If anything, there's a very slight downturn in classification. We've got more of the sort of poorer performing water bodies classified at poor and now one at bad as well in 2019. The percentage compliance is at 23%, so 13 of the surface water bodies for ecological status, that is, which is marginally above the national average. I've included a table on there just picking out exactly how many changes we've seen between the two data sets. And again, there's a slight negative shift, but not really a huge amount of change overall. Looking more detailed at some of the sort of key ecological elements. So I've picked these 6 out. These are 3 of the more sort of important water quality elements, and also 3 of the biological elements that we'd sort of commonly target for an improvement project. Just had a quick look at how they're performing in the new data, and it's really quite a split across those 6. So in terms of dissolved oxygen, invertebrates and ammonia, it's quite a good picture really. All of them are above 95% compliance across both data sets. Phosphate is performing better in the Tamar catchment than we see elsewhere in the in Devon and Cornwall, around about 70% compliance, and that's very consistent across the two data sets. But for the fish element and for macrophytes and phytobarent phos, I see a drop off to around about the 50% mark. I don't think there's really any trends looking at an elements level between the two data sets, but it certainly helps us to pick out where the biggest pressures on classification for the ecological status is coming from. And now it's just very quickly going to look at chemical status. So this is something that's been in the press quite a lot since the classifications were released. We've obviously seen a major change in chemical status for our surface water bodies, and it's something that affects the whole country. It's not specific locally at all. And we're now seeing, basically for the 2019 assessment, all the water bodies are failing. And this is down to new assessment methods being used for a subset of the persistent chemicals in the environment. We're looking at those and their presence within biota rather than within the water column. So it's really a sort of shift in the standards that are being applied and also the assessment criteria, rather than a massive change in the environment that has resulted in this change that we're seeing in terms of classification. Obviously, the chemical status also influences the overall water body status, the very highest level of classification. So we're also seeing failures across the board there for our surface water bodies. Just very quickly to say as well, in terms of change from the previous cycle, the River Basin Management Plan, I did have a quick look at any objectives that were set for the second cycle, just to see if we were targeting any particular outcomes by 2021. There wasn't anything in there for the Tamar catchment. So all of the objectives were either for 2015, so they'd already been achieved, or they were for further into the future in 2027. So there's nothing really to review objective wise. I'm now going to look at data in the updated River Basin Management Plan and start with the measures data set. So the measures data set at the moment is held in a couple of spreadsheets which are accessible out of the Data Explorer. The first of the two spreadsheet looks at confident measures for the forthcoming River Basin Management Plan, and the definition is that these are highly likely to happen in the next cycle. So we've got a real good visibility and confidence around funding and also around the sort of practical elements of project delivery. Within this confident measures spreadsheet, there's a further split which is picked up by the left-hand column of this sort of screenshot here, and that's where we've linked the measure to a specific outcome through the River Basin Management Plan cycle. So we've set an objective using that measure. They're the blue ones, so where we've linked an outcome, and also the green ones are where we've not linked a specific outcome. So we're confident the measure will take place, but say where it's a catchment wide scheme, it's a lot harder to pick out a particular outcome for an individual element in a water body. So we've not been able to actually set a specific objective against that measure. I will say the vast majority of information in the confident measure spreadsheet is nationally derived. So for the purpose of this presentation, I've only been able to include a very small subset that are specifically linked to the Tamar catchment. And within that sort of national programme, it's dominated by the WINET programme, so the Water Industry Environment Programme, and that's sort of the bulk of the confident measures. It's obviously a lot of that will impact locally as well, so by no means is this the entirety of the measures for the Tamar catchment. So just to very quickly run through these local confident measures, we've got the top two are based in Plymouth, one looking at urban drainage, which is largely influencing the estuary water body, and also partially the Tory Brook, secondly in Plympton, which is sort of environmental enhancements to the Long Brook and the Tory Brook. And it's worth mentioning both of those projects also have linkage to the flood risk management plan. So we're looking at both improving the flood aspects there and the environmental aspects. The lower four sort of wider reaching catchment projects, we've got the Dartmoor NFM work, which just about touches the top of the Tamar. The land management pilot, that's a sort of Devon and Cornwall EA project, which is looking at getting more sort of land management focused officers into posts, and a particular focus on soil management with that project. Southwest Peatland Partnership, again, is up on the moors looking at habitat restoration for peatlands. And the Tamar Upper Improvements Project is focusing on a subset of water bodies at the top of the Tamar catchment, sort of delivering river restoration and land management type outcomes up there. So that's quite closely linked to the Environment Agency focus area that's up there. The second measures spreadsheet that I mentioned as we came onto this topic, so this one covers measures that have got a lower confidence for delivery in the next cycle, and it's termed potential additional measures. Unfortunately, all of these are sort of nationally populated, so I haven't got a subset I can show on the screen for this presentation, but it's sort of worth a look. And there's a split there between sort of the ones that are reasonably likely to happen in the next cycle and measures where we would need a lot more effort from those involved to actually get them over the line. The measures spreadsheets can be accessed on the top link there. That goes out to the Data Explorer. The WINET programme that I mentioned is summarised within the measures, so I've also put a link in the presentation that goes out where you can see the sort of specific local measures that are included in that programme. Next, I'm going to move on to the Catchment Partnership catchment pages, which were developed, I suspect, most likely by some of the people on the call through the Catchment Partnership and also the catchment coordinators. So the purpose of these was to provide an overview of the objectives of the Catchment Partnership at their sort of scale of influence, so in this case with the Tamar management catchment, and to identify priorities in the catchment, risks, and also measures for improvement. The pages are accessible out of the Data Explorer at a management catchment scale, and I've popped a link on the next slide for the Tamar one specifically. A key part of these pages, again, is the measures. So I've took a screen grab of the Tamar ones. It's two categories, very similar to how our programmes and measures are structured. And we've got the confident delivery and also the less certain ones. So this slide here is showing the confident delivery, where we're really expecting to see these measures take place in the next cycle. So we've got WINET projects with key sort of enhancement drivers, the Plymouth River Keeper work, Beaver management in the Tamar catchment, the Southwest Peatland Partnership up in the headwaters of the Tamar, the Tamara Landscape Partnership, and lastly, Upstream Thinking 3. Just very quickly looking at the less certain ones, got a project looking at establishing a freshwater bathing water within the catchment, work around data sharing, sort of projects looking at non-native invasive species, mitigation for heavily modified water bodies in urban areas, improvements in the management of wastewater discharge and misconnections, and lastly, a look at improving agricultural practice. And the direct link out to the catchment page is at the bottom of the slide there. The last data set I'm going to look at from the updated River Basin Management Plan is the new objectives. And the objective setting was a part of the plan that we worked on locally, but it was really to quite prescribed guidance. We didn't have free rein over it, and that is sort of originating from parts of the legislation, parts of the Water Framework Directive itself. So when we're setting an objective for a water body, we're looking at it in two parts. So we look at setting a target status and also a year by which that target should be achieved. So you should be able to see here on the top left table, we're looking at say an objective of good status, and then there's a target year going along either 2015, 2021 or 2027. So In terms of the River Basin Management Plan, the default objective in terms of a status that we have is good, unless there are specific criteria that mean that cannot be reached. So that is things such as cost benefit issues of delivering good status, or real sort of technical feasibility issues. And that could be things like it simply isn't practical to achieve. For us in Devon and Cornwall, we're largely looking at diffuse problems for our environment. That's a little bit of a summarisation, but I'd say we're dominated by diffuse issues rather than, whereas other parts of the country, you've got sort of quite significant singular point source issues, and running sort of feasibility and cost benefit assessment against those sort of major single issues is a lot easier. So for us, it's quite difficult to rule out the achievement of good status based on cost benefit or technical feasibility. So you'll see the vast majority of the water bodies in the Tamar catchment are targeting good status as their objective. So just looking across at the table in the top left here, I've just picked out one water body that is actually targeting moderate. And just to explain that one, that's the Withy Brook, which is a tributary of the River Liner. And the case there is we've got a fish classification issue where we're predicting fish species to be present upstream of a sort of significant natural barrier, which is quite a large waterfall. And, you know, there's just no chance of them getting there. So the reason for setting a lower objective in that case is recognising that there's not an environmental problem that we need to work against. It is just an issue with the data set. It's a classification issue rather than a problem that needs resolving. The second aspect of the objectives on here is the target year. So the original year that was set for the first River Basin Management Plan was to reach target status by 2015, which obviously hasn't been achieved. So subsequently, it's been extended to 2021 and 2027 alongside an accompanying justification. And those justifications are shown in the sort of lower table on that slide, which is the reason for alternative objective. And what we've got on the slide here for the ecological status objectives, the ones that are targeting good by 2015 are typically already at good status, so they've achieved their objective. Good by 2021 or moderate by 2021 reflects that that's the status they've achieved in the 2019 data set. And then the 2027 objectives, which form the vast majority of them, these are ones where we're not currently at the target status based on the current classifications. And you'll note that there's two categories for the 2027 objectives. There's one water body where we're confidently saying that by 2027 we're expecting to see good status, so we set that objective. For the remaining 42 that have got 2027 as their year, they're down as low confidence objectives, and what that basically means is that we don't currently have the measures in place that will see them achieve that status by 2027. So it's, as it currently stands, it's not looking likely that that objective will be achieved. The other thing on here that I've included is around the chemical failures. So the table at the top right of the slide looks at 4 of the chemical elements that are failing in the 2019 classifications and the objective year that's been given for their compliance. So as you can see, particularly for PBDEs, it's a long way into the future that we're expecting to see those reach their target standards right to 2063. So we're expecting those elements to be failing for a long time to come. I've popped links at the bottom of the page again that goes out to objectives on the Data Explorer. And the second link goes out to a additional objectives table, which is for European protected areas, so things like SACs. But in terms of the Tamar catchment, there isn't a huge amount in there, to be honest. So I haven't included any more detail, but that is there if you do wish to have a look at And now I'm going to have a quick look at the consultation questions. So the consultation is open now. It has been since the 22nd of October, and it's running through till April the 22nd next year. It's an online consultation on the Citizen Space website, and when you have a look through the consultation, it's quite helpful in that it provides links out to the various pieces of information that you need to answer each question. So it kind of sort of glues everything together a little bit and helps with finding the information. I'm just going to run through the questions really quickly. So the first one is around implementation of the plan. This question is largely covered by the National Once documents that I mentioned earlier, so it's a bit of a difficult one to look at today without sort of being able to share those documents through the slides. But what we're sort of really looking at in the response is sort of risks of those implementation routes and sort of how practical they are. The second question is on the objective data set, which we've just run through, and that's looking at whether you agree with the objectives that we've set and any suggested changes, so where you think that they're not correct in their current form. The next two questions look at the measures data set. The first one is regarding the confident measures, which was the first spreadsheet that I provided a subset on, and that is really asking where we've got missing confident measures for the next cycle that have got funding in place. Then the second measures question is around the potential new measures spreadsheet, and it's looking at how we can best achieve delivery of those sort of less confident measures, and again, any additional ones that could go in there. The fifth question is around catchment priorities and catchment pages, so it's reviewing those measures and priorities that were on the catchment page, and again, really asking quite specifically for where changes could be made. And I think it's perhaps a case that there may be changes since the submission of those catchment pages. I'm aware they were done a fair while ago now. And the last question is far more open-ended, so it's more looking at general comments on the draft River Basin Management Plan. I think the first five give quite a steer on which aspects of the plan we're looking at, but then any more general comments about the structure, about the feel, about the ambition of the plan, I'd suggest including in that question number 6. Lastly, I'm just going to very briefly mention alignment with the flood risk management plans. Obviously, we're talking about the consultations for both plans today, and we'll come on to the front after this presentation. But just to flag that there have been a lot of efforts made to prepare and consult both the River Basin and flood risk management plans together, and that is sort of seeking a lot more integrated outcome of the final plans. So much of the alignment in terms of the River Basin Management Plan is within the national text. I think locally, like I've worked with the local front leads to try and get as many local measures as possible reflected in the River Basin Management Plan, but we were somewhat limited by the criteria for measures that we could include, particularly around confidence on delivery. So yeah, it's mostly, for our side anyway, on the River Basin Management Plan, it's mostly within the national text and the implementation principles where you'll see that alignment. And that is my last slide, so more than happy to move on to questions. And if you do want me to jump back to any of the previous slides to help the questions, please just let me know.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dan. And Rob, are you planning to host questions, or would you like me to host questions?
I'm happy to do a double act with you, Lucy, if that's okay. I think you've already put a really good call out there. Is there any thoughts, or if not questions, is there any feedback that we can sort of take back to improve the process or improve the information, or on the basis that we just had a lot of technical information in a very short space of time, is a case of needing to take that information away and reflect sort of on it and then have a look at it?
Yeah, if you have a question now, then raise your hand and I'll come to you, and if not, then we'll move on to the next presentation.
So I've got one, sorry, it's Martin Williams. I think we touched on earlier on the change in the methodology that's sent some of the classification of our river water qualities to fail across the piece. Does that change in methodology change any of the aspirations or targets that now need to be reflected in the plan?
Yes. So yeah, this is relating to the chemical status classifications for 2019. So the change has been that a number of the chemicals are now looked at in biota, so we're looking at their presence in the flesh of things like fish rather than the presence in the water column, and it certainly has changed the objectives for those elements. So on the objective slides of the presentation, the little table on there covers those particular elements that are failing sort of across the board, and it sets a much later target date for compliance for those elements. So that's where we're going all the way back to 2063. With the chemical failures, so what's happened is there's largely already controls in place. So a lot of those chemicals are covered by previous directives, but they are very persistent in the environment. So what we're really seeing is like a recovery time at the moment, and the objective's been set against an estimated recovery time for those chemicals. So it certainly does change the sort of target like objective for those chemicals.
Thank you.
I think Sean Conver's got a question. Sean, do you want to go for it?
Hiya, yeah, Sean here from Plymouth University. Yeah, okay, leading on from that really. So you've said that you're going to be aiming for 75% good status by 2027. So does that mean that you are opting some of those elements out? Because obviously that's not going to be covered under the one out, all out. And the second question I had was, at the start you showed a degradation in water quality, you know, based on, and you mentioned climate change and increasing population. I was wondering, have you done any analysis on that in terms of the split between the two, which is most significant, and whether if you have, whether you've done that on a regional basis? So I was wondering, say for the Tamar, where do you stand between, you know, what is the split between urbanisation and climate?
Okay, so the first one, the 75% target, relates to good ecological status rather than good overall status. So there is quite a change in how we're talking about water bodies since those chemical assessments came out. So ecological status would sort of exclude the chemical side of things. So that target wouldn't be impacted by those new chemical classifications. The second question I will probably have to take away. I have to confess that isn't my slide. That's one that I've picked out of the national presentation. So I will need to do some checks just as to where that information has come from. And I'll take it as an action and come back to you if there's any further detail, if that's okay.
Thanks.
David Smith.
Yes, thanks, Lucy. It's just a follow up to Sean's question. Really. I'm surprised, Dan, that those are the two things that come out as being. It's a national slide, maybe. In the case of the Tamar, urbanisation is not really a major issue in the last 10 years. I know there's been some growth, but it's not significant. Agriculture surely has to be on that slide as well. It's in terms of increasing agriculture intensification. You know, we spent £4 million on upstream thinking in the last 10, 15 years on the Tamar, and there was no change in the status graphs whatsoever. In fact, the slight one catchment is now bad, so that, I don't know which section that was the river, but it's quite depressing, really. Yeah,
that slide was nationally linked, so it's very much looking at your sort of headline change in national pressures. I completely agree with the comment with regards to the Tamar catchment, and agriculture is a dominant sort of RNAG that we've got for reasons for failure within the management catchment. That bad water body is the Darrell water, which is a small tributary in the upper Tamar area, and the bad classification comes from fish. We've got a very sort of deprived fish population up there. There is a project ongoing looking at the feasibility of improving that water body. At the moment, it's one Rob's leading on. So kind of looking at the current state of play and whether it is actually possible in terms of the sort of hydrology and geomorphology up there to make improvements.
Okay, any other questions from anyone? Oh, one more. Martin Worth.
Hi, yes, I'm a Cornwall councillor from Saltash area along the Tamar. I'm being asked by residents, and I don't know if this is the right point to ask this question, is in relationship to who's taking on the flood risk and protecting the residents. So is that here or does it come later? But that's certainly something, you know, we've got a flood risk, but it's who's taking on the responsibility to protect them from it.
Yeah, I'd suggest that's probably a better one for my flood risk colleagues who are going to pick up the flood risk management plan shortly, if that's okay.
Sure, that's fine, that's okay,
Yeah,
just understand.
perfect.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks everybody. I think we'll move on now to the flood risk management plan presentation by Simon Jeffrey. Simon, over to you.
I definitely don't look like Simon, but I'm going to do it instead, if that's okay. All right.
Great.
I'm just going to put this.
Yeah, you get a much better presentation with Millie. But I'll be here to answer your questions.
1 sec. I'm just going to share my screen. That one. Fab. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, thanks.
Great. So just Councillor Martin, I think that was, I don't want to, I've not ignored your question, but if we give you the presentation and then we can do questions at the end and then revisit your question, I hope that's okay. So I am here today with Simon to introduce the draft second cycle flood risk management plan, which is for the southwest, but we've got them across the whole of England. So during this session, the aim is to provide you with some background of how and why the flood risk management plan for the southwest was developed. And then what we've done is we've picked out some key themes that we think are of interest for the Tamar Catchment Partnership. So that will mean that hopefully you will feel well equipped to answer the consultation as a catchment partnership and provide us with some feedback of what you think of the draft plan. So I'm just going to provide you with a bit of context to start with of why we've got flood risk management plans in England. So they are our local delivery mechanism for delivering the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy. So hopefully you're familiar with it, but this is a strategy for the whole of England of how we want to manage flood and coastal risk for the next 100 years. So this is the vision, a nation ready for and resilient to flooding and coastal change. So the strategy ambitions of the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy is there's 3 ambitions: climate resilient places, which I'm sure you're all aware of these, but climate resilient places, making sure that what we build now is resilient to our climate in the future, and also making sure that our communities are able to adapt to flooding and coastal change with climate change. So the strategy sets out that we need to be embedding this new resilience approach to how we manage flood and coastal erosion risks. So it's shifting our focus more towards resilience. So when this strategy was developed, the definition of flood and coastal resilience was that we would plan for, better protect and respond to, and then recover from flooding and coastal change. And if we can do that, then we are more resilient to the future climate that we have now, and which will worsen in the future. So it is these kind of so we need to keep continuing to do these 4 factors which are in this slide to make sure that we're ensuring that we're resilient in the future. So this is kind of the main goal of the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy. So moving on to how we are delivering this locally, in flood risk management plans, we've developed these locally, and these flood risk management plans are plans which cover and set out exactly how we will manage flood risk from the year starting from now until 2027. So although they are our delivery mechanism for achieving the national strategy in our local areas, they're also a requirement for of the flood risk regulations. So this means that they're a statutory document that we must produce as well. The reason I gave you the national strategy before is because this is the first time that we've translated our national ambitions, which I just set out, into our local actions that we're doing on the ground. So it's the flood risk management plan which contains these local actions and measures of how we are delivering our national strategy. And then finally, we've got a 3-month public consultation, which is taking place now. So that started on the 22nd of October, and it will close on the 21st of January. So you might be wondering, what does the plan look like and what format is it in? So as I mentioned, we've got flood risk management plans across the whole of England. So there's a lot of actions that are in there that will be nationally consistent across the whole of England. So that will be routine work, like maintaining our flood warning service that the Environment Agency has. So measures like that, instead of them all being duplicated in local plans, we've got one national flood risk management plan document which sits at the top and has all of those types of measures in. But then below that, the lights have just gone in here. Below that, you've got your regional flood risk management plans. So for us, we've got a Southwest flood risk management plan, and that's where the measures associated to the Tamar would sit. So in there, you've got river, thank you, Simon. So in there, you've got your river basin district measures. So those are measures that are associated to the whole of the Southwest. So that can be all the way up to Bristol area and Dorset area. And you can see that in that red outline that we've got. Then you've got measures that sit in management catchments. So for your catchment partnership, you'd be interested in the Tamar management catchment measures. So these are measures that are either associated to the whole of the Tamar management catchment or to specific communities within the Tamar management catchment. And then below that, you've got flood risk area measures. So if you remember earlier, I just mentioned that it's our statutory requirement to write a flood risk management plan. So the national team have produced some flood risk areas. So they've been nationally defined as at-risk areas. So for the Tamar management catchment, that's Plymouth. So we have more detailed measures in there, and we've worked with Plymouth City Council to develop those measures. And then finally, the strategic areas, we've got one in Somerset, Levels and Moors. That's quite far away from the Tamar. And then finally, we've got a strategic environmental assessment, which comes along with the flood risk management plan. So here you can see what an example of what the different types of measures look like. So the river basin district measures, I've picked out ones here that will be hopefully of interest to you in the Tamar management catchment. So for river basin district measures, they're very high level and they tend to be something that we want to do across the whole of the southwest of England. So here we've got exploring opportunities to reconnect rivers with their floodplains. That's something that we'd like to do across all of the southwest. Below that, you've got your management catchment level sort of scale measures. So you've got your time scale here. So by 2027, the Environment Agency would like to work with partners to improve land management. You can read this, but in a specific area. So we've got here, it's a focus areas, Horror-Bridge. And then underneath that, we've got our flood risk area measure. As I said earlier, that in the Tamar management catchment is Plymouth. So we've got more specific measures associated to Plymouth. So when you see the plan, that is why Plymouth has got a lot of detailed measures, because it's a flood risk area compared to other areas. So these measures are all hosted on a new interactive mapping tool that we've developed in the Environment Agency called Flood Plan Explorer. It's very similar to the Catchment Data Explorer in the sense that it makes these measures more accessible for everybody to see. And there's a link to the Flood Plan Explorer on the consultation link, which is provided at the end of this presentation. So just to cast your minds back to how we developed these measures and when we organised, and hopefully you remember, the place-based planning workshops as part of the Challenges and Choices consultation back in November 2019. So this was when you had a chance to input your key issues and opportunities around the Tamar management catchment. We have listened to those and we have fed those into our flood risk management plan measures. And here is a word cloud on this slide, just showing you what some of the key themes were that you fed back to us were issues and opportunities in the Tamar management catchment. Just to highlight, as Dan did back in the last presentation, we have tried our best to align our flood risk management plan measures with the River Basin Management Plan objectives. We've got at least 35% of our measures do that, but it is a flood risk management plan, so that's why it's maybe not 100, because there are other sort of works on the ground that we do that unfortunately they just don't align with improving the environment. So that's where we're at the moment. So here are the key themes that we've sort of cherry picked out of our flood risk management plan measures to hopefully spark a bit of interest from you, so that it will help you to understand what's in the flood risk management plan and help you to write your consultation response. So a lot of our measures promote adaptation to climate change, as we are trying to deliver the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy. We also want to support the local nature recovery strategy. There's a pilot in Cornwall, which I'm sure you're all aware of, and it would be great to get that more widely implemented across the southwest. Reviewing beaver reintroductions, carbon, nature-based solutions. You also spoke a lot about plastic, and so we've got some measures in there for you. Working together with all our partners and in aligning environmental activity to our flood defence projects. So I'm just now going to give you some example measures for each of these themes so you can see what they look like. So here we've got promoting adaptation to climate change, So this is the top measure here is of the Tory Brook in Plimpton. So this is all about increasing our community resilience, as well as making infrastructure improvements and enhancing the environment. And then, so that's quite a detailed scale measure. But then we've also got a higher scale measure, which is implementation of adaptation plans in Devon, Cornwall and Isles Scilly to better manage adaptation along the coast. Next one, supporting the local nature recovery strategy. As I mentioned earlier, developing plans for a local nature recovery network in the River Tamar catchment. So we've got a measure in there where we'd like to do that within the next programme. Reviewing beaver reintroduction opportunities. Simon, I feel like this one maybe you might have some input for.
Yeah, thanks, Millie. Yeah, obviously there's the beavers already in the catchment, and obviously with the DEFRA consultation and linked to the work the Cornwall Council are currently doing on mammal reintroduction, it just gives us a framework for FCRM to kind of essentially input into it in a positive way. So make sure that that's referenced and that we are recognising the benefits of them, but also how you manage them where it's critical that they don't adversely impact on kind of flood defence infrastructure. So thanks, Mary.
Great, thanks, Simon. Carbon reduction offsetting. So this is more of a Devon, Cornwall and Isles Scilly wide measure that we'd like to reduce and offset our carbon to achieve the net zero carbon pledge, which the Environment Agency's put out by 2030. We've also got our nature-based solutions, and so we've got specific measures about improving soil health. So here we've specifically said that we will work with the Tamar Catchment Partnership to develop and deliver programmes of soil condition improvements. To produce multiple benefits. And then here we've got one of our plastic measures. So as this is a flood risk management plan, it needs to be associated to reducing flood risk. So this measure is all about reducing our plastic waste and minimising plastic waste produced through flood and coastal erosion risk management activities to reduce the impacts of both flooding and also from any sort of plastics that block assets, which can increase flood risk as well. Working together, all of our measures, well, pretty much all of our measures, you might have noticed we've got that we'll work with the community, work with partners. So yeah, we've spelt that one out really in a lot of our measures. So here's one of Corsan's, how we're going to work with our communities and our partners to manage the catchment, as well as improving our infrastructure to reduce flood risk and also increase our community resilience. And then we've also got here, finally, we've got align environmental activity to flood defence projects. So yeah, this is all about all of our measures. We do try to nature-based solutions are one of the priorities. If it is possible, we want to be doing it. So yeah, further exploring and realising nature-based solutions and how we can incorporate them into our flood risk schemes. So this one's a Plymouth flood risk area specific measure. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of the types of measures that we've put into the flood risk management plan, and hopefully they are specific to the Tamar Catchment Partnership. And then you can have a read of the measures through the consultation link to see what else we've got in there. So this slide is just highlighting the key sort of take-home messages for the whole of the Southwest Flood Risk Management Plan. So as I mentioned at the start, we're delivering the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy through our plan. So this is locally how we do that. Our approach is resilience and adaptation. It's not all about defending. So yeah, changing our approach. In terms of delivering our measures, as you noticed, our measures talk about how we're going to be working in partnership, but working in partnership does require like funding sources, and we also require it can be challenging working in partnership, as we all know, I'm sure. So there are risks associated with that, but it's how our measures are. And then finally, the measures are strategic and they're place-based, which has meant that we can that all of our measures because they're strategic, some of them they're in terms of flood risk area measures are highly detailed, but across the whole of the Tamar management catchment, they're not, we can't be really detailed in them. So we've captured that through our strategic and place-based measures. Finally, here's our consultation questions. They're split into sub-questions. So here I've put up the 5 sort of key themes that come out of them. So the first is, do you agree with the measures within and outside of the flood risk areas? After that, there's the connections and climate change. So do you agree that these measures are supporting the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy? And do you think that they're delivering multiple benefits for flood risk management and the wider environment? The third is all about the usability of the Flood Plan Explorer. Is it helpful? It would be great to hear your feedback on what you think of it. Number 4 is all about how can you support the delivery of the plans. So if you can highlight any opportunities in your consultation of what you're doing and where you're doing it, and if that can help us to achieve the National Flood and Coastal Risk Management Strategy, then we'd really like to hear about it. And then finally, the final question is about strategic environmental assessments. So yeah, there's an opportunity to talk about those there. And then finally, we've got a link to the consultation, and that is everything. So